Two top executives at the world's biggest news broadcaster have resigned after an expose about yet another journalistic fiasco. The head of the BBC and its CEO of news both announced that they are stepping down. One of them, in her statement, linked her decision to a new controversy. It involves how the BBC doctored Trump's January 6, 2021 speech before the insurrection at the Capitol. What the BBC did is wild. It took two clips that were nearly an hour apart and stuck them together like one statement. You don't do that. But some news outlets pointing to this as proof of bias have created a different problem of their own. They are cutting off what Trump said, so you get a false positive impression. Everybody's misleading you. But this show lets you tune out the noise and get truth. That is coming up. Plus, that same investigation shows new evidence of something I've told you about here before. The BBC unquestionably pushed Hamas lies all over the world and knowingly prioritized them over facts. And when Israel, the United States, and Jordan rescued a Yazidi sex slave from Gaza, what did the BBC do? Incredible. Meanwhile, in coverage of last week's elections here in the United States, the media has been using misleading data to make claims about who voted how. That's just one of the problems. They're also searching for a simple storyline where there isn't one. And maybe worst of all, they're failing to address basic points about what government officials have the power to do. No wonder the figures on civic knowledge in America are so terrible. All that, plus the mainstream media's favorite streamer announced his anti-democratic stance yet again. But even that isn't slowing down the fawning profiles of him. Coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. I'm Josh Levs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact-checks the news. It is so great to have you here. I love seeing that new people are joining us every week, and that those of you who have been with me from the very beginning are being so supportive. Thanks to everybody. Along with this show comes a newsletter. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. And one thing I like to do at the top of the show is share notes from the latest paid subscribers. The newsletter is free, but paid subscribers get additional content, social media content, and they get cleaned up, annotated transcripts, and more. Let's see. Karen Bloom wrote, I have listened to you and appreciate your input. Thank you. Ruth Crystal, she writes, truth does matter. Thank you. Oh, these are terrific. Keep them coming. Let's see. I have some updates for you. In a previous episode, I told you about the vile, anti-American, anti-Semitic streamer Hassan Piker. The mainstream media loves him, of course, and they keep presenting him as some sort of great hope for Democrats to win over what they're calling the manosphere. He was, of course, at New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani's celebration, hugging AOC. No amount of anti-Semitism from the left prevents her from hugging someone. Anyway, here is something Piker said that night. A listener sent me this clip.
Yeah, I think we are in the heart of the imperial core. This is the country that defeated the USSR, unfortunately.
America defeated the USSR, unfortunately. How much more information does the media need in order to understand that these far-left folks oppose democracy? For the record, there's a reason there are no communist democracies. Also, if he finds that unfortunate, why doesn't he move to Russia? He can help them try to build a new USSR. They're clearly trying to. Also, if the media understood basic history, then they would explain to people why communist societies quickly become so similar to fascist ones. The far left is swimming in dangerous, anti-democratic forces and anti-Semitism. The media is praising Mamdani, ignoring dangers in the far left, and making it seem like that must be some sort of answer to Trumpism. And here is an important counterpoint. Listeners sent me information about this too. There is something going on the right. The president of the Heritage Foundation, that's a conservative group, he is facing massive criticism from within, and for good reason. He stood by Tucker Carlson as Carlson keeps platforming an openly anti-Semitic, Holocaust-denying, crazy streamer named Nick Fuentes. The head of Newsmax Television, that's a right-wing network, he assailed the Heritage Foundation leader and others. So, this is why I'm telling you this. In right-wing media leadership right now, there are people calling out anti-Semitism on the right. In fact, as I record this, there are calls from within the Heritage Foundation now for its president, Kevin Roberts, to resign. That was pushed by a media executive and others in right-wing media. See what happens when media executives step up and show the courage to call out hatred? Nothing like this is happening in mainstream media. Instead, they keep platforming and praising Hassan Piker. All right, I'm keeping an eye on all that for you. But now on to media misses in coverage of last week's elections, starting with another bane of my existence, exit polls.
Exit polls, though, did determine that Ciattarelli's embrace of Trump was hurting him. In some exit polls that came out tonight, voters who said that they were dissatisfied with the focus and the state of the current country were going to Cheryl in very strong numbers.
That's PBS discussing the governor's race in New Jersey, where Democrat Mikey Sherrill beat Republican Jack Ciattarelli.
Another key demographic was Latino voters. In 2024, Trump made big inroads with Latino voters in New Jersey. Trump won 43% of Latino voters in the state versus Kamala Harris, but it seems that his time in office has soured them on him, down 10% in comparison, with just 32% of Latinos supporting him.
Many of you started listening this year, so you might not have heard a year ago when I did an episode about exit polls. They are notoriously untrustworthy, and news agencies know this, but they keep using them on election nights and the following days anyway. Here's a basic idea. Big numbers in exit polls are good enough to make general statements. So like, in exit polls, the vast majority of voters say what their top issue is. Sure, you can say that. But differences like 10 percentage points in a demographic, you can't claim that off of exit polls. They are a mess for a whole bunch of reasons. It usually takes months to find out what happened with different demographics. Here's one example. After the 2024 elections, I explained that reports in top news outlets said that Trump had gotten a huge jump in support among black voters and that his support among black voters stayed exactly the same. Yes, you heard me correctly. Those were just different major news outlets. They were looking at two different things called exit polls, neither of which should be used to draw any conclusions like that. It wasn't until earlier this year that we got the first real trustworthy look at how different demographics voted. That was in episode 51, so you can scroll back in your feeds and hear it. So, don't draw big conclusions about demographics from these exit polls, especially when you hear somebody say 10 percentage points. It's just not enough information for us to work with yet. We already had surveys in general in America that indicate Trump's support among Latino Americans has been going down, which makes sense given a lot of what he's doing, especially the ICE raids. But how that affected local and state votes in this off-year election, we don't know yet. When that information is available, I'll bring it to you here. Okay, so that's one problem, but there's another one as well. The media instinctively looks for a single overarching big picture story on any election night. Here's a clip from NBC, and I appreciate the effort you'll hear, but it's a reminder that life isn't always that simple, and you can tell your audience that.
A lot of people see last year as a battle for the soul of the Democratic Party. And here I don't know what answers you get when you have two moderates win for governorships and then you have a Democratic socialist in New York City.
Yeah, it's funny. I hear Republicans talking last night about the New York City race being the key one. I hear a lot of Democrats trying to steer it to Virginia and to New Jersey. I don't know how much New York City replicates nationally, but it's a very Democratic city. So is this saying something about what's going on inside the Democratic candidate, and will more Mamdani candidate-like candidates arise?
We can only hope not. Democratic voters in a very liberal city elected Mamdani. Now, you might not have heard this in the reporting, which was extremely pro-Mamdani, but both his supporters and the opposition had big turnout. In the end, Mamdani got somewhere around half the votes, so people were incentivized to show up to vote for him and against him. In other places, a far-left socialist supporting terrorism funders threatening an illegal arrest of a foreign leader would not fly among Democrats. But that's why, to me, one of the biggest concerns about the New York race has been how the national media supports him, creating a false impression for the entire country. The media using national platforms to present him as this great solution, that message reaches people nationally and contributes nationwide to radicalization in favor of the far left. It whitewashes the dangers. That's also why I've been concerned about some national Democratic figures supporting him, like House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries at the very end, coming around to that. Jeffries is usually better than that on anti-Semitism. But I was glad that Kamala Harris, Obama, and others did not endorse him and do not call Mamdani the future of the Democratic Party. Any city in America being willing to embrace someone who has done what Mamdani did, that is terrible for the country. But as a news story, there is no single message, except that people don't like Trump and want economic change, which we already knew before these individual elections. Speaking of economic change, maybe this is the biggest failing of all. Mamdani has been promising things that a mayor can't actually do, but you wouldn't know that from the vast majority of the media coverage. Here's the Washington Post discussing his victory.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway beyond the way that he campaigned was his laser-like focus on affordability. That is something that carries across states, cities, races. That is something that voters poll after poll after poll have said is top of mind right now.
Yeah.
Mamdani clearly came at it from a progressive point of view, promising city-run grocery stores and free buses and rent stabilization in Des Moines, Iowa, or rural Wisconsin, or some of the places where the House majority in 2026 will be decided, probably won't work.
How about they can't just magically work in New York? Like, Mamdani keeps talking about taxing the rich. The mayor doesn't decide that. That's decided by the state government, actually in my hometown, Albany. Every time he talked about hikes on income taxes, every news report should have pointed out that the mayor doesn't decide that stuff. There are also all kinds of reasons that his other economic promises couldn't work. In some cases, he could appoint people to certain positions, and then in turn, they could make some changes. But the economic forces he talks about are so much bigger than what a mayor can just do. I was wondering whether any major news outlets have discussed this. So I asked an AI tool, Gemini, to search. I've talked about this before. While AI tools are not useful for fact-checking, they are good at amalgamating a ton of information and seeing who is covering what to what extent. Plus, I've tailored it to my needs to get you the most useful information. Anyway, the results were really interesting. It came back to me with reports from right-wing sites, like one called City Journal that I've told you about, and industry sites like Realtor.com. There have been a few scattered reports in major media, but in general, they've been about horse race coverage. And they have not given much attention to the fact that Mamdani cannot just do these things he's promising. There's a big lesson in this. Follow me here. After Trump won in 2016, there was all this hand-wringing about how the media had given him all this coverage and focused on personality stuff and on what he wanted the media to focus on. And there had not been enough focus on policies. There were these analyses about how incredibly little attention the media gave to specific policies and what they would mean. Big media did the same thing for Mamdani in this race on the left. Tons of coverage of the things he wanted, framing him as a victim for facing criticism, playing him up as a big hope for Democrats, just as they do with Hassan Piker. Incredibly little about how his economic plans couldn't translate into reality. Americans desperately need the media to introduce them to basic concepts of how government works and who does what. Back in 2018, a survey from Johns Hopkins found that a third of people could not name who their governor is. About half could not say whether their state has a 1 or 2 house legislature. I've been looking for surveys on knowledge of city-level stuff, by the way, and while I'm not finding national data on that, all the data shows that Americans' knowledge of how government works is very, very low. When you see how the media handles politics, that's no surprise. Coming up, a leaked document uncovers new disasters at the BBC. Plus, when America helped rescue a sex slave, what did the BBC do? You'll find out.
Two-faced grin, but I know the script. Call it what it is. You a hypocrite. Hypocrite. Say you love me, but you hate it still. Smiling in my face while you plot to kill. Hypocrite. Acting real, but it's counterfeit. You can't hide the truth. Yeah, I'm done with it. Keep
Do you remember the little engine that could? Let's talk about that for a second. The dangerous polarization taking over our society is being fueled by the media. And there's a reason for that. The market rewards it. These days, if you join a big lie of the right or the left, it's like you are put on a bullet train that speeds to numeric success. This show goes against the market, and so it is a much tougher, harder path to grow this show. We need your support to grow this movement for truth, to help fuel this train up the hill. Here are things you can do. Yes, you can become a paid subscriber to the newsletter. That's helpful. Also, there are free things you can do. Rate and review this show on the platforms, wherever you're listening to it now. Everyone who does that makes a huge difference because that's how those algorithms work. Tell individuals about this show. Contact someone you know and say, I think you specifically would find this episode interesting, and here's why. You can also sponsor episodes and tell sponsors about the episodes. You can find out all this information in the show notes and at my website, joshlevs.com. Let's root for truth so our society can come together. And let's prove to the market that you don't have to join a big lie to succeed. With your help, we can get there. Thank you. In a report about the January 6, 2021 attempted insurrection, the BBC doctored a Trump speech. The Telegraph, a British newspaper, has pointed this out in a new report. Here is what the BBC aired.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell.
And then the Telegraph shows that this is what Trump actually said.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
The stuff about fight like hell came close to an hour later. Here's what he said there.
Most people would stand there at 9 o'clock in the evening and say, I want to thank you very much. And they go off to some other life. But I said, something's wrong here. Something's really wrong. Can't have happened. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
So the BBC took those little parts and stuck them back to back as though they were one statement. You don't do that. In journalism, there certainly are times that you lift out words in a quote, but not from that far apart, making it seem like that's one statement. And you can never do so in a way that can change the meaning or context. You do that for brevity and clarity. So that is obviously journalistic malpractice. But that's not the whole story here either. Right-wing media are having a field day with this. They're saying, look, Trump actually said we'll cheer on our brave congressmen and women. But no, he was very much not talking about praising lawmakers in general. In this speech, he lied about the election repeatedly, claiming that votes were stolen, claiming there was all this fraud, which there wasn't. Here is more of the section in which he talks about the lawmakers.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
And he said it's time to stop acting like a boxer with his hands tied behind his back. We have to fight much harder. But he also said this.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Today we will see whether Republicans stand strong for integrity of our elections, but whether or not they stand strong for our country.
News agencies should have given you all of this context. But that doesn't change the fact that the BBC is a disaster. This example was brought to light as part of an investigation into bias at the BBC. The Telegraph got a hold of an advanced copy of an analysis by a guy named Michael Prescott. He's a journalist and an advisor to the BBC's Editorial Standards Committee. The Trump example is not the worst of BBC's offenses. It gets way, way worse. You might have heard me in the past talking about how the BBC whitewashes Hamas and applies totally different standards against Israel. I've reported that here, and there's an open letter to the BBC calling on them to cut it out. You can join that open letter. It's in my newsletter, and you'll find a link in the show notes. According to the Telegraph, this new report, the Prescott report, shows new examples of despicable things the BBC has done, pushing Hamas lies around the world, hiding its own journalistic failures, which it knew about. One guy, who the BBC kept citing as an alleged eyewitness in Gaza, he had used his social media to call for Jews to be burnt as Hitler did. The BBC nevertheless had no problem airing him 244 times, as though what he claims to have seen is somehow trustworthy. Another guy who called Jews devils and less than human, he was on 522 times. In both cases, we're talking about during the war between Israel and Hamas terrorists. This report shows that when the BBC claimed that thousands of babies in Gaza were on the brink of starvation, the BBC already knew that was false. And here's something else involving a group of people I've told you about, the Yazidis. That is a minority group which has a home base in Iraq. In my episode on the October 7th anniversary recently, just a few weeks ago, I told you about Yazidi girls and women being held as sex slaves by Islamists, including in non-Muslim nations. I shared with you a report about a guy in Australia who held onto a girl as a sex slave. Well, here's the story of another young sex slave, Fawzia Amin Saido. She was captured by the Islamic State when she was 10 years old. Here's a report from VOA, the Voice of America.
She says IS sold her as a sex slave 5 times, coerced her into converting to Islam, and then married her to a Palestinian IS fighter. She says she was drugged and raped.
I was young and I couldn't bear that, which is why he decided to give me a drug. I took the drug, which numbed me, and then he raped me.
She had 2 children by him before she turned 15. He became more and more abusive, she says, especially after he also married someone else. This VOA report says that he married another woman, but you can't say another woman when the first one is a girl, not a woman yet, and the other one might have been just as young. She probably was. This guy was ultimately either captured or killed. It's unclear. She wanted to care for her children, but even if she could somehow have gotten back to where the Yazidis live in Iraq, they, at that point, had a decree that they would not accept children of rape by ISIS. But if she left her children to go back, then think what could happen to them. Her captor's family took her into Gaza, where Hamas took her phone so she couldn't have any access with the outside world or even with other people there outside of where she was being held. Here's more from this report in 2024.
Saido says that while she was in Gaza, the IS fighter's family became abusive, and she missed her own family deeply. She says it was too painful to bear.
I started taking pills, like 50 at a time, but it didn't kill me. I tried to end my life 21 times.
She says her chance to escape from Hamas-controlled Gaza came a few months ago.
And I made contact with the Israelis, the Americans, and some people from Canada.
Israel, the United States, and Jordan together rescued her. She is now on the outside, free, trying to get her children to freedom as well, away from her captor's family. Let me guess. You've never heard about any of this from big mainstream media. There were some stories, but they were, of course, buried because they don't fit the narrative the legacy media wants to push. Here's where we get back to the BBC. The BBC did do a story, but in Arabic, they devoted nearly 600 words to a Hamas statement calling her a liar. Let me give you some context on this. A lot of news reports are around 800 words total. Devoting 600 words to anything in a news report is a lot. And for the record, it's a fact. People in Gaza have held on to sex slaves, including Yazidis. Okay, so here's what we've got. This report was leaked. 2 top officials are now stepping down. But even they, in their public statements, aren't acknowledging the biggest part of this. What they said coming up. I have a new speaking event coming up next week. This one is in Atlanta on Wednesday, November 19th. Anyone in the Atlanta area, be there and tell everyone you know in the Atlanta area. It's at 7:30 p.m. that evening. All good people are welcome to come, ask your questions about the media, and learn lots of stuff. You can get details about it in the newsletter. BBC Director General Tim Davie put out a statement in announcing his resignation. He insisted that the entire board of the BBC has supported him unanimously and that this was all his decision. If that's true, that means the board has to be replaced as well. If you care about journalism, you cannot support the head of an organization allowing all these disasters. Plus, given what the BBC has been up to, the board should be out anyway. Back to his statement, Tim Davie did not mention any specific story, but he did say the current debate around BBC News contributed to his decision. He also did this really lame thing in the statement. He wrote, quote, "There have been some mistakes, and as Director General, I have to take ultimate responsibility," instead of saying that he made mistakes. Meanwhile, the BBC's head of news, Deborah Turness, stepped down as well. In her statement, she did give a reason. She cited the controversy on how this program called Panorama misrepresented Trump's quote. She said that ongoing controversy, quote, has reached a stage where it is causing damage to the BBC, an institution I love. She also did the mistakes have been made thing. But even on their way out, both these folks refused to face reality. She said recent allegations that the BBC is institutionally biased are wrong. He insisted that despite the inevitable issues and challenges, our journalism and quality content continues to be admired as a gold standard. Anyone who is admiring today's BBC as a gold standard has no interest in truth. But these two being out does show something important. It shows that sometimes news executives can be forced to make some changes. Our job now is to make sure that top executives at all the big news agencies come to understand this. Just as BBC heads can be out over bias, so can they. And that journalistic malpractice is just as awful in coverage of the Middle East as it is in coverage of U.S. politics. Note to executives of big legacy media, you stand corrected, and we will see to it that you and other people find out. All right, folks, let's do this. Spread the word. Share this show with everyone who lives within a 50-mile radius of you and everyone you've ever met. Subscribe, rate, review, do all the things to help make this show possible. Send me your thoughts, questions, feedback. Keep those messages coming. Supporters reach me directly through the newsletter. Everyone can use a free form at my website, joshlevs.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.